Walk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal Album Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the greatest and most important bands to ever burst onto the scene in the progressive rock genre in the last 30 plus years. And this band were a huge part of the resurgence for the prog rock scene back in the mid 1990s, and they are still going very strong to this day as we speak. And I've been a huge fan of this band for a really long time now. And this is a band that I've been wanting to talk about on this series for quite a while. And I'm really excited to be discussing this band's entire catalogue of albums. And this is a band that's, quite frankly, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only legendary American progressive rock band, Spock's Beard, and this is part two of a four-part special where I am going to be discussing the entire catalogue of Spock's Beard, and this is a follow-up to the last one that I did where I discussed all of the Spock's Beard Neal Morse albums. And for today's special edition, which is part two, I am going to be discussing all of the Spock's Beard Nick D'Virgilio albums. So, as I mentioned already, Spock's Beard was formed in 1982 by brothers Neal and Alan Morse, and the original Spock's Beard lineup was comprised of Neal Morse, Alan Morse, Nick D'Virgilio, and John Ballard. But John Ballard would leave just before the band's release of their first album, and he would be replaced by Dave Meros, and Ryo Okumotu would join shortly after. And the lineup of Neal Morse, Alan Morse, Dave Meros, Nick D'Virgilio, and Ryo Okumotu is considered by many to be the classic Spock's Beard lineup. And the classic Spock's Beard lineup would release 6 studio albums, and Neal Morse would shock all of the fans and his bandmates and announced that he would be leaving Spock's Beard, which came about after the completion and release of their double concept album Snow, to pursue a solo career, and felt that it was time to answer God's call. So this would leave Spock's Beard without their frontman and main composer, who written and composed all of the music. So this was a massive blow for Spock's Beard. So the big question would be, what happens to Spock's Beard now with Neal Morse gone? And this kind of mirrored a very similar situation to Genesis when Peter Gabriel left the band to pursue a solo career. Much like Phil Collins, who originally was Genesis' drummer and stepped up as the band's singer, the same sort of thing happened for Spock's Beard. Nick D'Virgilio was the Spock's Beard drummer since the band's inception, and while he always did the occasional lead vocals and backing vocals, Nick D'Virgilio would step up as the replacement for Neal Morse, and he would still play drums, but he would also play guitars and keyboards, and he pretty much became Spock's Beard's new frontman, leaving Spock's Beard as a four-piece, although that would soon change when they would play live and bring in a second drummer, which was Jimmy Keegan, who would play the drums while Nick D'Virgilio would handle the vocal duties. Now, with the Spock's Beard Neal Morse albums, they were very much rooted in traditional progressive rock, lots of big epics and very massive, complex music. With the Spock's Beard Nick D'Virgilio albums, they were still rooted in prog, but they were a lot more laid back, a lot more softer, and the music became a lot more AOR and pop oriented. Now, obviously, when Neal Morse was in the band and he composed virtually all of the band's music, There would be pop hooks and AOR leanings, but it was still very much rooted in traditional prog. With the Spock Speed Nick D'Virgilio albums, the songs were, for the most part, a lot shorter and a lot more commercial. And it was very clear that Spock Speed were heading in a very different musical direction and doing something completely different to what they were doing previously with Neal Morse. And when you lose someone the stature of Neal Morse, who had written and composed virtually all of the band's music, it is a massive blow. Most bands wouldn't even be able to recover. Some bands wouldn't even feel the need to continue. But to Spock Speed's credit, they not only soldiered and continued, but they thrived, much in the same way that Genesis did when Peter Gabriel left and Phil Collins stepped into his shoes as the band's vocalist. And unlike before, where Neal Morse had written most of the band's music, for this incarnation, it was a true band effort. All four musicians worked and collaborated together. They would co-write most of the music, or they would write compositions individually. And you could really see and feel that this was a true collaboration and a real band effort. And Spock Speed, as I mentioned previously, they had recorded and released 6 studio albums with Neal Morse. And for today's special edition, as I mentioned already, is part 2 of a 4-part special. I am going to be discussing all of the Spock Speed Nick D'Virgilio albums, which is a total of 4 studio recordings. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky here. Now, with the Spock Speed Neal Morse albums, all of them were excellent, especially the last 2, which for me are classic Spock Speed albums and probably the band's greatest albums they have ever made. With the Spock Speed Nick D'Virgilio albums, I feel that, obviously there are a couple here which are absolute excellence. I feel that while they're okay, some of them are a bit of a hit and miss with me. And I think that the blow of losing Neal Morse shows in the music, but that doesn't make these albums terrible. They're still very good, but they're just different, and it takes a while to get into them, if I'm truly honest. But that doesn't mean I don't like them. I still like Spock Speed. I still like these albums, which I'm going to discuss. It's just that they're a little bit more commercial than the Spock Speed Neal Morse albums. Those albums are full on classic traditional progressive rock music. As I mentioned already, with the Spock Speed Nick D'Virgilio albums, they're still very much rooted in prog, but they're a little bit more towards pop and AOR. That's just my opinion. But that doesn't make these albums terrible. They're just a bit different, if I'm truly honest, but still very enjoyable, in my opinion. So we're going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 2003, and this is the first Spock Speed album to feature Nick D'Virgilio as the band's singer, post Neal Morse, and this one is called Feel Euphoria. So as I mentioned, this is the first album to feature Nick D'Virgilio as the band's vocalist after the departure of Neal Morse, and while this is a very enjoyable album, I found this album quite hard to get into. And that wasn't because the music was bad, the music was good, but it was just very difficult to wrap my head around because, Neal Morse was such a dominant presence in Spock Speed, and he written and composed so many of the band's most memorable songs. And this was such a huge shift from the more prog style of music that the band were doing previously. And this is a lot more laid back, a lot more commercial, much more leaning towards the pop side of things, but still good music nonetheless. And Nick D'Virgilio is an incredible singer, a great drummer. He's super talented, much like Neal Morse is. And, you know, you can really hear the shift in the direction of Spock's Beard's music. And as I said, there's some enjoyable stuff, but it's very hard to get into, especially when you have to follow someone like Neal Morse, not to mention all of those albums that they recorded and released with him in the band. But I feel that the first half of this album, it was okay, but it wasn't as memorable. But the second half of this album, for me, is excellent, and it kind of harkened back to the classic Spock's Beard sound that we all know from those classic albums. And the second half of this album is just excellent, but the first half of the album, while it's okay, it's just maybe not as strong. But still some good tracks on here. But I think had we had cut this album in half and left with the second half, I would put this album maybe a little bit higher and probably a little bit stronger. But this album, still very good, but it's kind of like a mixed bag, if I'm truly honest. So we're just going to have a quick look. So there's Spock's Beard now as a four-piece. It's a very cool album cover there. I like the artwork here. It's got the floating rocks. And there's the lyrics, and there's Nick D'Virgilio. There's Alan Morse, and we've got more lyrics here as well. A very cool looking Dave Meros with more lyrics. And the ever wild and crazy Ryo Okumotu, and more lyrics as well. And there's the now four-piece Spock's Beard band, just goofing around on the instruments. There's a little breakdown of the tracks as well. And there's the band looking very cool. And we've got some thoughts from each of the band members. That's cool. I like that. That's a very cool picture there. And there are the guys, and there's the production and credits. So a lot of the music is all like written and co-composed by all of the bands. Obviously, some contributions from John Ballard, who would also go on to form the Spock's Beard offshoot, Pattern Seeking Animals. But a lot of the music is co-written by all of Spock's Beard. So we've got Nick D'Virgilio on lead vocals, drums, acoustic and electric guitars, and percussion. We've got Alan Morse on guitars, Ryo Okumotu on keyboards, and Dave Meros on bass. And we've got additional musicians. We've got Claire Pascal on trumpet and piccolo trumpet, Gina Bolino on French horn, Steve Eltz on cello, Gianna Jacobi on violin, John Ballard on additional keyboards. So, you know, pretty much a band effort with some additional musicians as well. So we've got the first track, which is the opener called Onomatopoeia, which is a really good, strong opener. And it really marked the beginning of an exciting new era. And Nick D'Virgilio on drums and vocals, just an all-round amazing player, and he can really do it all. And Dave Meros on top form as well, as is Alan Morse and Ryo Okumotu. They're just bringing their A game, and it's a really good, strong opener. Then we've got the bottom line, which is decent. Then we've got the title track, which is one of the best tracks on this album. Shining Star is a great track. East of Eden, West of Memphis is great. And Ghosts of Autumn, which is one of my favorite tracks from this album. And then we've got the 6-part suite called A Guy Named Sid, which for me is probably the best thing about this entire album. And it kind of harkens back to the classic Spock's Beard style with Neal Morse, and it's just really enjoyable. So we've got part one, intro, then we got part two, same old story, part three, you don't know, part four, judge, part five, Sid's Boys Choir, and then part six, change. Just unbelievable music from start to finish. And we got Carry On, which is a great track, and then we got two bonus tracks, Moth of Many Flames, which is great, and the closer from The Messenger. Very good, strong effort from top to bottom. As I said earlier, I feel that the first half of this album, while it was decent, it's a little bit weak and it takes a while to get into. But the second half of this album is excellent, very enjoyable. And I think if we maybe cut this album in half, we could probably be looking at a classic Spock's Beard album. I probably would put this album maybe a little bit higher, but as I said, the first half of this album, it's okay, but the second half definitely more than makes up for it. So standout tracks for me are On the Matip here, Shining Star, East of Eden, West of Memphis, and Ghosts of Autumn. A Guy Named Sid, which is the 6-part suite, is just for me the best thing about this album, as I mentioned already, and the closer from The Messenger. Good, strong effort from all four musicians, and this really marked the beginning of a new era with Nick D'Virgilio as the band's new vocalist, and he does a tremendous job filling the shoes of Neal Morse, which, quite frankly, would have terrified anybody else. But Nick D'Virgilio more than steps up to the plate, and he delivers, as do Alan Morse, Dave Meros, and Ryo Okumotu. They're on top form as always, and a very good, strong effort and a very good, decent album post Neal Morse. But as I said, the first half, yeah, it's all right, but the second half, classic stuff. Love it. So there you have it. Phil, Euphoria, good, strong efforts, and the beginning of the Nick D'Virgilio Spock Speed era. Love it. Great album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2005, and it's a double album, and this one is called Octane. So this is the second Spock Speed Nick D'Virgilio album, and it's more or less a continuation from Phil Euphoria. There are tracks on here which are really good. There's some really good, strong material. There are some tracks that are okay, but maybe a little bit weak. But again, this album is pretty much more in the style of Phil Euphoria. You know, it's very commercial with lots of pop hooks and leaning slightly towards AOR. But there's still some great stuff here. There's some really good, strong material as well. And Nick D'Virgilio, as always, is an excellent singer and he handles the vocal duties very well. And he's also playing lots of different instruments aside from the drums. And you can really feel that he's carrying the band. And all of the guys, Alan Morse, Dave Meros, and Ryo Okumotu, they're just on their A game. And you can really feel that these guys are very strong as a unit. The musicianship is top notch. And as I said earlier, a real band effort, and it shows. So let's have a quick look. So we've got here a little bit about the album, and we got the lyrics here as well. And a lot of the material is co-written by virtually all of the band. Also, there's some individual compositions as well, so there's more lyrics here. And we've got more lyrics here as well. And there's Nick D'Virgilio. We've also got like an instrumental here as well. There's Alan, looking cool. Howdy, wow. Looking very slick like a cowboy. And there's Dave Meros just looking all relaxed there. And we got more lyrics here as well. More lyrics here as well. And there's the whole band as well. So, as I mentioned already, a lot of the compositions were, pretty much like composed or co-composed by the whole band. So we've got here Nick D'Virgilio on drums, lead and backing vocals, acoustic and electric guitars. And we've got Alan Morse on 6 and 12 string and electric and acoustic guitars and vocals. We've got Ryo Okumotu on keyboards and Dave Meros on bass. And we've got a string quartet as well. And we've also got a little horn section as well. And we've got some vocals provided by Molly Pastucci and John Ballard, who provides lots of sounds and ambience as well. So it's pretty much Spock's Beard with additional help. It's a picture of the looks like that gas station. And there's the band again, and there's the credits and production notes. And there you are. So we got here on disc 1, we got like little like mini suites here, so it's kind of like a continuation of what the previous album was showcasing. So we've got here the 3-part suite called A Flash Before My Eyes. So it's the ballet of the impact. So we got part 1, Prelude to the Past, The Ultimate Quiet, and A Blizzard of My Memories. It's actually not a bad opener. It's actually quite a good, decent opener. Then we got I Wouldn't Let It Go, which is pretty good. Surfing Down the Avalanche is great. She Is Everything. We got part 1, Strange, What You Remember, and Words of Forever. One of my favourite tracks from this album. I actually really got into this track a lot. It's a really good one. Then we got Climbing Up That Hill, which is good. Letting Go is good. Of the Beauty of It All, If I Could Paint a Picture, and Into the Great Unknowable. Another great track as well. Really liked that one. It was a really good track. Then NWC, which is good. And There Was a Time, which is good. And The Planet's Hum is good. And we got Watching the Tide is a decent track. And then we got the closer, As Long as We Ride. So some pretty good tracks here. And the ones that I mentioned are my favourites. And then we got on disc 2, which is our bonus disc, we got When She's Gone, which is pretty good. Follow Me to Sleep is decent. Game Face is good. Broken Promised Land, yeah, it's quite a good track. Listening to the Sky is good. And then after that, we got like these little short tracks, which, with the string quartet as well. Someday I'll Be Around and I Was Never Lost and Paint Me a Picture. They're quite decent tracks. And one of them is more like an outtake from Flash, but it's still pretty good, I would say. So the standout tracks for me on disc 1 are The Ballet of the Impact, She Is Everything, Of the Beauty of It All, There Was a Time, Watching the Tide, and As Long as We Ride. Really good tracks they are. I thought they really stood out to me. And on disc 2, When She's Gone, Game Face, Broken Promised Land, and Listening to the Sky. Overall, a pretty good album, pretty solid album, and good continuation from Phil Euphoria. There's some really good stuff on here, but again, as I said, with these 4 albums, obviously there are a couple here I feel are better than others. This is still a decent album, but I still feel that with Nick D'Virgilio as the singer, who is super talented and doing an amazing job, I feel like these guys are more or less trying to find their footing after the departure of Neal Morse. And there's some memorable material on here, but it's still very much in that commercial pop leanings that that was shown on the previous album, Feel Euphoria. But there's still some good songs, especially the ones that I mentioned. And as I said, it's a very commercial album. Obviously, there's still the prog there, but it's not as potent as the Neal Morse Spock's Beard albums, in my opinion. But still, this is an enjoyable album, and there's some memorable tracks on here, in my opinion. So there you have it. Octane, a decent continuation of Filth Euphoria, but at the same time, this is still Spock's Beard trying to find their way after the departure of their main songwriter, Neal Morse. Good album, but I feel that the better stuff will come shortly after this album, in my opinion. So there you have it, Octane. Decent effort. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2006, and it's a self titled album, and this one is simply called Spock's Beard. So after two very commercial albums from Spock's Beard, for me, this album marked the return of Spock's Beard going back to their classic prog rock roots. And you know what? I'm so glad. And this is a very strong album. And it's like the return of an old friend. And you turn around and say, it is good to see you back. You've been gone a long time. Welcome home. And this really is like a welcome home party for Spock's Beard. And, you know, I'm so glad because nothing against Octane and Feel Euphoria. They're good albums, but this is the Spock Speed we want to hear. Lots of great songs, epics, you name it, it's all here. And you know what? This is what they really should have done from the beginning. And you know, I'm not knocking these guys. I appreciate and respect that they wanted to do something completely different from what they did with Neal Morse. But at the end of the day, this is what Spock Speed are all about. Lots of catchy songs, great hooks, and lots of cool epics. This is what we've been wanting. And, you know, we did have some of that in those other albums, but I feel with this one, when I was listening to this album in preparation for part two of this 4-part special, it really blew me away. I thought, wow, this is so good. This is what I've been wanting to hear from Spock's Beard, you know. Not knocking the commercial stuff, there was some good material there, but this is what we want to hear. This is classic Spock's Beard, and I love it. It's really good. So let's have a quick look. Very nice and colourful. There's Nick D'Virgilio. Very similar to King Crimson Red, you know, with that whole black and white silhouette thing going on there. Very cool. There's Alan Morse, and we've got the lyrics here as well. There's Dave Meros. There's more lyrics here. There's Ryo Okumotu, and there's more lyrics here as well. So a lot of the material is co-composed by the whole band. There's more lyrics here as well, and it's really good. It's a really good album. There's more lyrics here. There's the guys. Tremendous stuff here. And there's the band just goofing around. And we've got the credits and production notes. So, you know, and we've got the string quartet as well. And we've got like lots of additional musicians as well. John Ballard, Ray Ellis, Rich Mouser on the vocals. We've got the Barnhart chorus. And, you know, we've got lots of different additional musicians aside from the core band as well. But the self-titled album of Spock's Beard is really, really good. It's a really good album, and it's a classic return to form for Spock's Beard. So we've got the opener, On a Perfect Day, which is classic Spock's Beard, one of the band's best songs. Love that. It's a really good opener. And we've got Skeletons at the Past, which is great. Is This Love is brilliant. All That's Left is great. And With Your Kiss, which is like 11 minutes long. Just one of the best tracks on this album. Really love that one a lot. Sometimes They Stay, Sometimes They Go is good. The Slow Crash Landing Man is great. Wherever You Stand is good. And Hereafter. And then we got the 4-part suite, As Far as the Mind Can See, which is one of the best suites on this entire album, and definitely something they would have done if Neal Morse was still in the band. So we've got part 1, Dreaming in the Age of Answers, which is great. Here's a Man is great. They Know, We Know is great. And Stream of Unconsciousness is great. And then we got the closer, Rearranged. Overall, top to bottom, excellent stuff. Remarkably strong. Far more superior to the previous two albums, which I'm not knocking. I'm just saying those two albums were good, but I feel this one is much better. And when you look at the Nick D'Virgilio Spock's Beard albums, it's like they're two different bands. You got the first two albums, which are very commercial, like almost like a poppy band, and then you got the second half, which is like, with these two albums, like proper classic prog band that we know and love, just really good. So the standout tracks for me are On a Perfect Day, With Your Kiss, Sometimes They Stay, Sometimes They Go, Hereafter, and the entire As Far as the Mind Can See suite. Just tremendous stuff. Absolutely love this one, and return to classic form for Spock's Beard. So there you have it, Spock's Beard, the band's self-titled recording, a great return to form for Spock's Beard, and one of their best albums they have ever put out with Nick D'Virgilio. Absolutely love this one a lot, and as I said, it's a return to classic form for these guys after two very commercial albums. Absolutely love this one. Tremendous album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2010, and this would mark the final Spock's Beard album to feature Nick D'Virgilio, and this one is simply called X. So X, as I mentioned, would be the final Spock's Beard album to feature Nick D'Virgilio as the band's vocalist. And I can tell you now, this album was excellent. I really enjoyed this one a lot, and I thought this had some of the band's most strongest material with Nick D'Virgilio, and it's a great continuation from the band's self-titled album. And I feel that with Nick D'Virgilio, they were really starting to find their voice, and they were really reverting back to the classic Spock's Beard that we know and love, but just with a different singer. And it really showed here, and I thought this was a very good album. There's only 7 tracks on this album, but they're all excellent, start to finish. This is remarkably strong, and wow, it's like the self-titled album was the return of the Spock's Beard we know and love. With this one, it was more or less their way of saying, we're back now, we're here, this is what we do, and we're in for the long run. There's nothing slowing us down, and we're here to stay, so to speak. And it's a really good, strong album. So let's have a quick look. So we've got lots of cool artwork, and we've got the lyrics as well. So a lot of the material is either co-written or composed by the band. So we've even got one Neal Morse contribution as well. So there's more cool artwork and lyrics as well. And we've got more cool artwork and lyrics as well. And we've got additional musicians featuring Jimmy Keegan, who would go on to become the band's permanent drummer, replacing Nick D'Virgilio, and John Boghold on additional keyboards. We've got French horn by Danielle Onizara and Dennis Giron on trombone and bass trombone. And we got the string quartet as well. So, and as I said, it's pretty much as the previous albums. It's Spock's Beard with extra musicians, and there's all the credits and production notes and who plays on what. So we got Nick D'Virgilio on drums, guitars, and xylophone and timpani. Alan Morse on guitar and vocals, Ryo Okumotu on keyboards, and Dave Meros on bass, vocals, and additional keyboards as well. And we've also got some more cool artwork and production notes as well. But a very good, strong album. Very enjoyable as well. So we got the first track, Edge of the In-Between, which is excellent. Great opener. Then we got Kamikaze, which is great. The Emperor's Clothes, which is excellent. From the Darkness is one of the best tracks on this album. It's 17 minutes long, really good track. The Quiet House as well, another long track, which is like 9 minutes, another great track. The Man Behind the Curtain is great. And then we got the closer, which is 16 minutes long, Jaws of Heaven. Excellent album, great follow up to the band's self titled, and just really enjoyable, really powerful album, and absolutely loved it. I thought this was a very good album, and certainly as good as the band's self titled. And as I said earlier, it's like the band is like two different bands. You know, you've got the very commercial side, and then we've got the very prog side. But for me, all due respect to the commercial side, the prog side is far more superior. It really is. And absolutely love it. So the standouts for me are Edge of the In-Between, The Emperor's Clothes, From the Edge of Darkness, The Quiet House, and Jaws of Heaven. Love it. Absolutely tremendous album, and one of the absolute best albums they ever made with Nick D'Virgilio. And once again, a true return to form for Spock's Beard. Absolutely love it. Great album. So, which Spock's Beard Nick D'Virgilio album do I think is the best one? Well, as I said earlier, they're all good. I feel that a couple of them are a little bit better than others. And obviously, you know, when you lose someone the stature of Neal Morse, it's a massive blow. Most bands wouldn't even dream of continuing. They would probably have packed it in. But to Spock's Beard's credit, they not only soldiered on and continued, but they thrived as well. And Nick D'Virgilio, you know, to his credit, I thought he did an outstanding job stepping into the shoes of Neal Morse as the band's vocalist, which quite frankly isn't funny. You know, it's a massive challenge, but I thought he done an excellent job. And some of the music that they made with Nick D'Virgilio, I'm not going to lie, was a little bit hard for me to get into. Very commercial, and it almost didn't sound like Spock's Beard. But later on, the better stuff came, and there is some incredible music. As I said earlier, it's almost like it's two bands. You've got the very commercial band, and you've got the prog band. But the commercial side, I won't completely condemn it. There's some really good songs on here. But the prog side, for me, is vastly superior. And for me, the best album that Spock's Beard ever made with Nick D'Virgilio, hands down, is X. I thought X was a really good, strong album. And the self titled marked the beginning of Spock's Beard returning to their prog roots. But I feel with X, they put their foot down on it, said, nope, we're here to stay, this is what we're doing, and come along for the ride if you want, but we're just doing the sort of album that we know we can do, and here it is. Great album, some excellent material. The self-titled album is great, but I feel that X is just a little bit more stronger, and this, as I mentioned, would mark the final album to feature Nick D'Virgilio, but what a way to go out. Just an excellent album, really good, strong showcasing for one of the greatest bands of all time in the progressive rock genre. Absolutely love it. So there you have it. X, for my money, the best Spock's Beard Nick D'Virgilio album. Tremendous stuff. Love it. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Spock's Beard Nick D'Virgilio album? Is it Feel Euphoria, Octane, Spock's Beard, or X? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And I will be back with part 3 of this 4-part special, where I am going to be discussing the Spock's Beard Ted Leonard albums. So make sure you don't miss that. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.